I have always prided myself on living a careful, disciplined life in Westbridge, a quiet town tucked away in rolling countryside hills. My days followed a steady routine, and I never entertained the idea of the supernatural. But one bitter New Year's Eve, while driving along a lonely country road to a party at my friend Nathan's family estate, I experienced a terror that still chills my blood. The night had grown unseasonably cold in recent days, and I remember how the air felt like it had been sucked dry of warmth. I set off early in the evening, my headlights piercing the darkness as I navigated the twisting, narrow road bordered by dense clusters of towering oak and pine trees. The road itself was barely more than a dirt track, its uneven surface and relentless curves making every mile an uneasy journey. I could see only fleeting glimpses of an abandoned shack off to one side, a decrepit structure that seemed long forgotten, but occasionally sparked a strange, flickering light in its grimy windows. About 30 minutes into my drive, my headlights suddenly caught something white against the murk. I slowed as I neared the source, a solitary figure standing motionless by the roadside. A woman, or what appeared to be one, clad in a long, flowing white gown that glowed eerily in my light. The dress was incongruous with the bitter cold, and something about her posture and the stillness of her body made my skin crawl. For an agonizing moment, I debated whether to pull over and offer help, but fear and an instinct to keep moving won out. My heart pounded so hard that I nearly missed the next twist in the road. As I cautiously passed her, I stole a glance into my rearview mirror and saw that she had turned her head ever so slowly to follow my car. I forced myself to dismiss the unsettling image, blaming it on the play of shadows and my own frayed nerves. I reminded myself that I was heading to a safe haven, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of Westbridge, where Nathan's family was hosting their annual New Year's celebration. The estate, a grand yet secluded mansion nestled in a clearing amid towering trees, buzzed with the warmth of laughter and festivity when I finally arrived. The inside of the house was a comforting contrast to the harsh darkness outside. Soft lights, the glow of a crackling fireplace, and friendly faces eased my tension for a while. I joined the crowd, helped clean up later as the party dwindled, and even shared a few quiet smiles with those who sensed my unease. After the last guests had departed, I returned to my car parked in the gravel lot. That's when I noticed the warning light on my dashboard, a low tire pressure alert that I'd come to expect each time the cold seeped in. I hesitated, a knot of worry forming in my stomach, but reason told me that these issues were common with older cars in winter. Reluctantly, I decided to drive back along the same dark road. I told myself I'd make it home with just a minor delay. The journey back, however, turned into a nightmare. Mere minutes after merging onto the narrow, winding track, I became acutely aware of an unsettling noise, a low, grating scrape, like metal being torn away from its moorings. My car shuddered violently, and despite my desperate attempts to steer away, it came to a sudden, jolting stop. With trembling hands, I stepped out into the bitter cold, clutching my phone for its weak beam of light. The sight that met my eyes was horrifying. Each of my 4 tires had been completely shredded, torn apart as if by some monstrous force. It was impossible to explain deliberate cruelty of the damage. It was as though an unseen, malevolent hand had systematically targeted my vehicle. I stood there, breath frozen in the air, as the silence around me grew oppressive. Even the wind had fallen mute, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, breaking the dreadful silence, I heard a faint, sorrowful whisper ripple through the darkness, a soft murmur that didn't quite belong to the night. My pulse raced as I switched my phone's light back on and scanned the tree line. There, emerging from the shadows at the very edge of the forest, was the woman again. This time, her white gown was smeared with dark, indistinct stains, and her once hidden face was revealed in ghastly detail. Her skin was pallid and stretched over angular features, and even her expression, a twisted, almost pained smile, evoked a feeling of profound despair and menace. Paralyzed by fear for a few agonizing seconds, I could only watch as she seemed to stand silently, as if beckoning or warning me. In that moment, every instinct screamed at me to run. With a surge of adrenaline, I turned and sprinted down the road, my footsteps pounding on the rough pavement as I heard the echo of twigs snapping behind me. I didn't dare look back until I burst through the gates of Nathan's estate. Once inside the safety of warm light and familiar faces, I finally allowed myself to breathe, though the terror of that night would haunt me for years to come. Later, the police conducted a search near the abandoned shack by the roadside. They found only scattered, lifeless remains of wildlife, evidence of a struggle in the underbrush, but no sign of the woman. To this day, I remain haunted by the inexplicable encounter and wonder what force or spirit had targeted me on that cold, unforgiving night. Story number 2. At the age of 26, I set off on a solo trip to the seaside town of Bayshore, a brief escape from my routine in the bustling city of Harborview. The visit was a mix of sunlit days and easy laughter with a close friend, but as the trip neared its end, I found myself dreading the return journey. I booked a late-night flight back home, expecting nothing more than a simple ride from the airport to my apartment. However, fate had other plans. After a long, uneventful flight, I landed around midnight. The airport was nearly deserted, its usually busy halls now echoing with a hollow silence. I hurried to the taxi stand and flagged down a cab, a well-worn yellow minivan with a faded logo that offered a bargain fare. I shrugged off an inexplicable feeling of unease as I climbed inside, attributing it to the fatigue of travel. Almost immediately, I noticed the taxi driver's unnerving behavior. In the dim glow of the dashboard, I could see his eyes fixated on me in the rearview mirror, an intensity that unsettled me more with each passing mile. The van hummed along a deserted highway, the rhythmic sound of the engine and the soft thump of tires on asphalt providing a false sense of calm. But as we sped through the night, I became increasingly aware of the driver's intrusive gaze and the way his eyes seemed to track my every movement. The interior of the cab was cramped and cluttered, with worn seats and a lingering odor of stale cigarette smoke. I tried to distract myself by gazing out at the passing scenery, a blur of dark silhouettes and distant streetlights, but the driver's behavior kept drawing my attention. His intermittent, overly personal glances and the subtle shifts in his tone as he asked mundane questions sent a shiver down my spine. Though I responded in curt, polite phrases, my heart raced with a growing sense of dread. The tension reached its peak when we approached what I believed was my designated exit. I signaled that I wanted to get off, but the driver, without a word, pressed on past the marked turn. Panic began to set in as I realized I was being forced into a situation that I could not control. In that moment, I discreetly texted my family, sharing my location and a brief, anxious message that something was wrong. The van continued along the highway with an eerie silence punctuating the driver's occasional glances. At the next red light, time seemed to slow. I mustered every ounce of courage, unlatched the door, and bolted from the vehicle into the cold night. I ran toward a nearby parking lot where a police car sat isolated under a flickering street lamp. The driver shouted something in protest, but my focus was solely on reaching safety. I managed to slide into the back seat of the police car, my heart pounding so fiercely I was sure it would burst from my chest. The officer, noticing my distress, drove me to a small, well-lit precinct where I was able to explain the entire ordeal. Even then, the images of that unnerving taxi ride lingered. Later that night, I returned to my apartment, still shaken and unable to fully relax. The building, usually a safe retreat after long days, suddenly felt ominous. The silence of my empty hallway was punctuated by subtle creaks and the soft rustle of wind against the windows. I barely had time to settle in before a new terror began. In the early hours of the morning, as I tried to coax sleep from my racing mind, I was awoken by a faint tapping at my window. I froze, listening as the sound repeated, methodical and insistent. My pulse thundered as I sat up in bed, the darkness of my room now feeling like an impenetrable void. With every passing minute, the knocking grew louder and more deliberate, as though someone or something was trying to make contact with me. Clutching my phone, I scanned the room for any sign of an intruder. The window was firmly locked, yet the persistent tapping continued, each soft rap echoing my rising panic. I lay there in a state of dread until, after what felt like an eternity, the sounds finally ceased. The following morning, my neighbor confirmed that he'd seen a stranger lingering near the building the night before, a faceless presence that left me even more unsettled. The entire experience left me with a lingering fear. In the days that followed, I took drastic measures to regain a sense of control over my life. I moved in with my parents temporarily, and together we installed security cameras on every door and window. I even purchased a self-defense device, determined never to feel so helpless again. The memory of that midnight ride, the menacing stare of the taxi driver, the relentless pursuit on a deserted highway, and the unsettling knocks at my door, remains etched into my mind as a stark reminder of how quickly a seemingly ordinary journey can spiral into a nightmare. Thanks for listening. Subscribe for more horror videos. Goodbye.